This is a film based on the radical Liverpool Street Station walk that took place on Sunday the 2nd of April 2023. The Communist Manifesto was printed in Liverpool Street in February 1848. It was first translated into English by Helen Macfarlane 2 years later. The authors, Karl Marx and Marx Engels, arrived in London in 1849 as exiles from the unsuccessful European revolutions of 1848. At this time, London was one of the world's largest cities and a major port and manufacturing centre. Marx and Engels studied the political economy of the British economists, the philosophy of Hegel, and the politics of the French socialists. They fused this into a theory and practice of historical materialism and put human labour power, commodity production, competition, and capital accumulation as the defining forces of capitalist society. They didn't say much about architecture or design or urban planning and clothing fashions, but Marx and Engels are the perfect place to start any urban walk. The expansion of capital led to the development of mass production from the 1880s onwards. This was intimately linked to the emergence of consumerism with its advertising and brands and perfect packaging and marketing. A global system of production, distribution and consumption was built. The area is now dominated by some of London's tallest buildings. Engineering solutions which involve the concentrated assembly of steel frames, glass facades, concrete floors, heating and air conditioning systems, water provision and sewage disposal, electrical circuits and fibre optic networks. The city is a concentration of capital. Capital which is accumulated in the buildings themselves. Buildings full of corporations feeding on capital, vampire-like as Marx describes it. Capital which flows through the fibre optic networks as ones and zeros, digital representations of money. The whole area is saturated with capital in all its forms and types. And as we go up Bishopsgate, that's Liverpool Street on the left-hand side, where the Communist Manifesto was first printed. We met outside the Bishopsgate Institute. We began with a wave of strikes in London which started with the matchwomen in 1888. This was followed by the gas workers and then the dockers in the summer of 1889. William Morris was involved, Marx Engels was still alive, and Eleanor Marx was elected an honorary member of the Gas Workers' Union for her role in organising and political leadership. The workers' movement has always included demands for better housing, for better health, for wage rises, for better conditions, and for education, and for the dignity and the emancipation of the working class.
He had this enormous commitment to working class education, as did the Reverend William Rogers. And so the idea was that he provided not just a library, but lecture halls, concert facilities, and the motto of the library when it was opened, and it's still the motto, I never stop learning. This is absolutely lovely. And Charles Goss, it was he over 41 years who built up the collection. And the collection is the labour history of London, the trade union history of London, the history of protest, the history of emancipation. So there's a poster outside the door at the moment about the history of gay liberation in London and that fight. But it has connections with people like the Brick Lane Circle, who have been bringing out the history of colonialism, the history of empire, which we will see towards the end of the walk. So it's been at the centre of the radical tradition in London. And to me, this is a very important building, because if we look here we have capital. And here we have labour. And let's just look at the aesthetic differences. Labour, look how nice it is. All those little patterns. Look at this. It looks like junk because it is a product of junk capitalism. That's where it comes from. There is no aesthetic there. Although, I do like the engineering. Don't throw the postmodern bath out with the postmodernism bath water. Okay, so this is we have now set the walk up. We have two nodes of opposition. We have Labour and we have Capital. And that's going to be our theme for the next hour and a half. Now, our next bit is going to be Broadgate, which is here. But just to keep you all moving, I'm going to suggest that you walk down to the end of the street. Now, has anyone here got problems with steps? If you have a problem with steps, just walk along at pavement level and we'll meet you at the end. It'll be obvious. But if you want to get a sort of a sense of what postmodern means in architecture, let's go up the steps and go along a little bit. Okay, follow the flag.
Follow the flag. You're the absolutely.
The Broadgate Centre was completed in 1985. Peter Foggo was the main architect, and he had worked for Arup and then set up his own practice. And the building was controversial in its time. It was one of the first postmodern buildings in London, and I think some people got in a muddle about postmodernism in terms of sociology and postmodern in architecture, very different things. In many ways, it was seen as a product of the new phase of capitalism spawned by people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. This is the world of the Big Bang. This is the world of deregulation. This is the world of privatisation, deliberate attempts to destroy the welfare state, ongoing attacks on workers' pay and conditions. And in many ways, we're still living in that world. But this is hardly the fault of the architects or the civil engineers. I think the issue is not so much the shape and the design, but that it's owned by British Land, one of London's major property developers and management companies. This company has a property portfolio of over £16 billion and is one of the top 100 companies for using offshore operations in Britain. And by offshore, we mean business fog, we mean tax avoidance. Tax havens can mean that money can be laundered. It means that dirty money can be used, money from some of the world's most repressive regimes. All of this is predicated on cheap labour. Often that labour can be described as being invisible but indispensable. It's not seen. The conditions of that labour are not known. The pay rates aren't particularly well advertised. People get quickly bored of watching other people doing repetitive work. But the real question is, what's the repetitive work like for the person who has to do it all day? How do they feel about it? Back to this idea of invisible and indispensable. There's this never-ending building of shopping centres, retail fulfilment centres, luxury apartments, hotel complexes. This fear from governments and from hedge fund managers that consumption is slowing down. This horror of the market that economic growth is falling. But what does all of this mean when the newspaper headlines say the markets don't like it? There's a continued growth of capitalist production is incompatible with the continuation of life on Earth. Sun Street runs along the western edge of Liverpool Street Station. It leads from the mass transport system to the offices where labour power is concentrated. Each day, a mass of individuals become atomised and further alienated from their own selves. To watch the movement of this mass of people at the beginning and the end of each day is to witness the immense force of capital acting to coerce living labour to do what it's told. It creates its own aesthetic, and we're immersed in this. But in the distance, capital and the city are changing shape again. After less than 30 years, Broadgate was threatened with demolition, capital burning itself up in ever more intense flames. Red brick replaced by glass and concrete. Steel is now on the outside of the building. A technical change from architectural drawings to computer-aided design and business information modelling. Capital creates constant movement. Even when there are no visible signs of people, there's a movement of machines, packets of data through the internet, the investment and generation of capital, the atrophy of people in systems, the corrosion of buildings. This movement of capital is ongoing and seemingly endless. Everywhere there are slogans and advertising, and it requires a lot of control. I like different styles of architecture, and I think this is comparable to music. The more styles you like, the richer you are. But that doesn't mean that we have to like everything. Likes and personal preferences can be difficult to understand and hard to explain. And imagine what would happen if there was no change. What style would the world be frozen in? The Gothic of northern France, Central European Baroque, neoclassical, the international modern style. We need to go beyond the immediate visual representations and to consider the function of buildings and the relationship between form and function, which can have immense complexity. There are lots of different designs and shapes of railway stations, but there isn't a single template.
to London from Germany in 1938. And I'm going to say a couple of things about this. The first thing is that Gary Lineker never compared the government to the Nazis. What he said, that the language was similar to the 1930s. And this is really important because the language which is being used by the newspapers, by the politicians, by all their hangers-on is vindictive, and it's leading to really nasty stuff happening. It's leading. Do you know how many people, how many Afghanistani people came to Britain with humanitarian visas in the last 12 months? Does anyone want to guess? Because I was shocked by this. 22. 22. So I was talking to the security guard this morning, and we were talking, and he told me he came from Uganda. And then he said, "You're our former colonial masters." Which was really interesting. And then he said, "But look at these people coming from Libya." He said, "It's been bombed into ruins. Look at Iraq," he said, "it's been bombed into ruins." And he said, and then these people are trying to come here because, you know, Britain has bombed their country. So this inflammatory language, not only does the British state and the American government go and blow these countries up, but then you try as a citizen and come away, and then you're persecuted with this language, as Gary Lineker says, which is reminiscent of the 1930s. We are in 2023. You know, it's nearly that period of time. And so Gary Lineker was right. It's not to do with just the Nazis, it's to do with the Daily Mail, it's to do with GB News, it's to do with Rupert Murdoch and all of these other people. And we have to find, as working class people, we have to find a universal unity to this. Because this isn't just about a humanitarian thing, or it's that as well, but we really have to say these people who are coming here are on our side, and they are part of our class. And I said we were talking about the Ukraine war and everything like that. I said, which Western politician is calling for a ceasefire? None of them. And he said, no, because they want this war. And I said, but what they've created, in this trench, they have Russian workers who used to work on railways. In this trench, they have Ukrainian workers who used to work in railways, and they've got them shooting each other. I said, imagine I'm a security guard, you're a security guard. I said, where's the quarrel? And that's the argument that we need to take into this.
It's a workforce that includes network engineers, commodity traders, plumbers, receptionists, welders, software developers, hedge fund managers, lift technicians, catering workers, security guards, insurance brokers, cleaners, project managers, database administrators, marketing managers, lawyers, tax advisors, and many more. It's a complex division of labour. The export of services from London is around £100 billion a year. £30 billion of this is from the financial services sector. Marx and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, "The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionising the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Constant revolutionising of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air."
Correction, THX. Alright, then just back off, THX 1138. Back off for a second. Okay, hold it, 1138.
What's wrong?
I need something stronger.
Take 4 red capsules. In 10 minutes, take 2 more. Help is on the way.
What's wrong?
I want you to make a visual record of this. We found it in the patching cells. We killed it.
Thank you for being conscientious. A visual record is being taken and filed with the Department of Biological Flow. You
What's wrong? Take 4 red capsules. In 10 minutes, take 2 more. Help.
If you feel you are not properly sedated, call 348-844 immediately. Failure to do so may result in prosecution for criminal drug evasion. To do so,
Is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it doesn't fit my consumer, and the store doesn't have any of the other kind.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it doesn't fit my consumer, and the store doesn't have any of the other kind.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it doesn't fit my consumer, and the store doesn't have any of the other kind.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it doesn't fit my consumer, and the store doesn't have any of the other kind.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it doesn't fit my consumer, and the store doesn't have any of the other kind.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized. We are sorry.
I just bought one of these yesterday, and it
if you feel you are not properly sedated, call 348-844 immediately. Failure to do so may result in prosecution for criminal drug evasion. If you feel you are not properly sedated, call 348-844 immediately. Failure to do so may result in prosecution for criminal drug evasion.
This is 30 St Mary Axe. Each building in this area has a history of capital investment, engineering and construction challenges, land ownership and property development. Each building has a history of the people who work there. Unionisation is patchy, if at all, and many workers lack any real form of self-organisation. St Mary Axe was completed in 2004. The build cost was £200 million. In 2007, it was sold for £630 million, netting its then owner, Swiss Re, a profit of £300 million. It was sold again in 2014 for £700 million, but this perhaps is a falling rate of profit.
The steel for this building has been manufactured in England, the glass has been manufactured in Germany. It has 65-metre foundations. So here we are in the middle of the city, surrounded by capital, surrounded by all this investment. So the first one we'll look at is the Lloyd's building. This is completed in 1986, just after 3 weeks after the Big Bang. Two different things about this. The Lloyd's building was commissioned, so it was built for a client. Whereas this building here, which is known as the 122 Leadenhall Street, also known as the Cheese Grater, this was built speculatively. So with the Lloyd's building, Lloyd's Insurance says build us a building, build us something that is unusual, build us something that's going to attract attention. One of the features of the building is that all of the infrastructure is on the outside, which a lot of people have said has actually made it very costly to maintain. I personally really like it. I mean, this is what I mean about architecture, open your hearts to old churches, which will be on the City Walk Church, not today, and things like this. So the Lloyd's building was built, commissioned, and it was opened just after the Big Bang. So it's a symbol of neoliberalism, but it's a symbol of other things as well. This building here was completed in 2014. Richard Rogers was also involved in this, but also Richard Stirk. It's a steel ladder, so you can see the ladder. It's effectively, they built this wall and then they put a ladder against it. And one of the reasons they built it like that is that this was a very difficult site. So when you build something as big as this, you need what is called a laying down space. You need to be able to bring the steel in, you need to be able to bring in all of the different bits. And they didn't really have an adequate laying down space, which is why they designed it like this. So Rogers and Stirk are the architects, but the engineers were Arab. Again, it's British land. So the same British land people that we saw in Broadgate, who are in competition with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, they're also here. And they completed the initial investment, but they sold the building 3 years after it was built in 2017 for £1 billion to a Chinese property developer, and the company that bought it is called CC Land. CC Land made its money in the 80s and 90s and early noughties from plastic bags. That's where it made its money. It made its money from plastic bags and from packaging. So you take one plastic bag, but if you sell millions and billions and billions and billions of plastic bags, you accumulate capital. And then you can turn that capital into something like this. And then you can rent this out for large amounts of money. And then you can expand your capital. So what we're seeing across the whole of London all of the time is the conversion of money into buildings to make money. And that's why we get this endless cycle. So there were two buildings already here that were only 20, 25 years old before they were knocked down and this was built. 85% of this was prefabricated. So it was built off-site and then it's built on-site. A couple of bolts fell off it, which again was causing... You kind of start worrying, don't you? Glass panel, bolts are falling off it and stuff like this. So while we've seen global capital coming into London, just use this as an example of how production has become global. So the cement for the building has come from Purfleet and Tilbury. There's about a dozen cement manufacturing plants in Britain. There's two very big ones in the Thames estuary. The steel came from Thirsk and Bolton and Malton. So you have this distribution of steel fabrication. The facades, that's the outside. They will have come from one of the sites in China. There are 5 sites in China which create a lot of this stuff. The door sets, there's 1,500 door sets. These are the big steel frame fire doors, entrances. They came from Scunthorpe. The door fittings, so you put the doors in, then you put the door fittings came from Birmingham. The bathrooms came from Flitwick, which is in Bedfordshire. The lifts will have been manufactured in either China, India or the Czech Republic. The mechanical, electrical and plumbing, MEP, that has come from Headcorn in Kent or Doncaster or Dudley. And the carpets, I spent the whole of yesterday doing this. I had so much fun. And the carpet, this is what, the internet is so brilliant. So I thought I'm not going to stop for the day until I discover where the carpets from this building have come from. And eventually I found the technical spec, and the carpets have come from a place called from Ulrichhamn in Sweden. So what do you do next? Google Earth, satellite image. And Ulrichhamn has a population of 9,500 people. And there's this lovely little village by a lake. And there in the Swedish forest is this huge factory making carpets. But not only for this building, Shanghai Public Library, the new classrooms at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the new offices of Microsoft in Mumbai. And so you get this sense of global production. We have global capital, we have global production. The desks, it goes on. The desks have been manufactured either in China or the Czech Republic. The chairs are manufactured by a company called Flock, which is based in Norway. They also have production plants in Poland and Sweden. The computers will have been made in either China or Taiwan or India or Brazil. And then some of the figures behind this. The total spending on IT last year was $4.5 trillion. Now, what is really, we've looked at the introduction of capital, we've looked at how a building like this, but the next bit in this equation, of course, is the workforce. One of the many fascinating things about the workforce in the Corporation of London, the City of London, there's about 600,000 people work in the City of London. Some of them are paid an enormous amount of money, but there's a lot of people, there's secretaries, administrators, plumbers, electricians, cleaners that make up this workforce. So you have this workforce of more than 500,000 people. The other thing about this workforce, it is the most diverse workforce in the world. Of these 500,000 people, 37% are what is classified as BAME workers. That is enormous kind of integration. So what you're getting with these big buildings is that you're bringing capital together, capital from a Chinese company that used to make plastic bags, capital for Aramco, which produces oil and gas, capital from these different places. Then you're bringing together production from the forests of Sweden to the massive kind of Foxconn in China, and then you're bringing workers together from all over the world. So in the City of London, every language in the world is spoken. 37% of that population of workers is described as BAME. So while capital is bringing itself together, it's also bringing the workers together. The great big question, which we haven't got time to answer today, is how all of that is organised. And that really, to me, is one of the questions of the 21st century, because when I said about refugees having a universal interest, this is the universal interest. We are all on the same plane as those Swedish carpet workers and those Chinese chip makers and the people in India making chairs and the people in Brazil making desks. When you look at like that, that's the common interest. And it's that common interest which is in opposition to capital. We've got two other places. Are people still up for this? We can go to Devonshire Square. Right, we're going to. It's a little bit of a walk up to Devonshire Square, maybe 10 minutes. But once we're there, we're nearly finished.
Shuffle, don't march.
Yeah. That is born on the basis of 1.5 million, if not more, years of evolution. A baby just doesn't come out without things. A baby is born with hands. The hand, as Engels described, is a product of human evolution. It is the development of the thumb. The hand is developed through tool making. Through tool making, we become human. We all have this ability to be tool builders. And then people will say, but beavers make dams and crows make nests and all the rest of it. But as humans, we are universal tool builders because we can build that block. We can build this. These warehouses, when they were built at the end of the 18th century, they were full of carpets, feathers, tea, high-value goods. We can make all of these things. People can make carpets that go into office blocks. They can make computer chips that go into your phone. So we are universal tool builders. So any child that is born with the potential to be a universal tool builder. And any child that is born into a general condition of advanced industrial society. They don't have to make the first iPhone. The iPhone is already there for them. They don't have to make MRI machines. Those machines are already there. So we're born into this huge accumulation of objects, of artifacts, of knowledge, and of science. So where Marx starts capital with the commodity, but central to the production of the commodity is human labour power. And it's the human labour power that makes all of the money in the first place. It's those Chinese workers who were making plastic bags, that accumulation of money in those plastic bags, which leads to that big tower. But without the human labour power, no plastic bags. Without the human labour power, no carpets. Without the human labour power, no steel structure. Without the human labour power, no desk. Without the human labour power, nothing.
The East India Company warehouses were built at the end of the 18th century. The company represented its own capitalist interests. Indian workers were forced to sell their goods at low prices and buy British goods at high prices. In 1857, the people of India launched a major rebellion against the British. This was violently suppressed and the British government assumed direct rule in 1858. The Indian Marxist economist Utsa Patnaik estimated that in today's money, British imperialism in India cost that country $45 trillion. In the 1820s, one of the occupants of 16 Devonshire Square was a merchant involved with slavery in Jamaica. Yet more legacies of an empire of exploitation. This topography can be mapped all over London, all over Britain, and in fact can be mapped all over the world.
So what we've done today is we've looked at capital. We've looked at capital as a social power. And I don't know what your impressions were of all of these big buildings. I think it's mixed. I always find it mixed and contradictory. It's not one thing. Architecturally, it's not one thing. Engineering, it's not one thing. But there is a lot of class characteristics about it. And the way that production is organised at the moment, remember what we talked about, human labour, and the power of the human hand and the power of the human brain, it is organised in a most extraordinarily oppressive way. And the people who are making microchips, which go into all of these offices, who are making computers, they are working in really shocking conditions. Young women in microchips in factories in China will lose their eyesight by the time they're about 30. There are shocking industrial injuries involved in all of this. When I talked about the matchwomen's strike being a revolution of the soul, if you work in these big buildings, they are saturated with corporatism. They are saturated with all of this stuff which kind of grates on you all the time. It's saturated with Orwellian language. If you work in these buildings, fill in this PowerPoint, write this report, fill in this spreadsheet, answer this email. It's a kind of digital conveyor that you're in. And you don't have the right to free speech in these buildings. We can only do that if we have a union and we can speak through our union. What we have in most of these workplaces is what the American sociologist calls, James C. Scott calls, is the hidden transcripts. And if you really want to find out what's going on in these buildings, you have to go into the corners where the workers will speak out of the hearing of the managers. And to be honest, that's the conditions that existed in the railways in the 19th century. That's where we still are with this. So capital is a social power, but it's a very oppressive social power. And it creates its antithesis. It's created by workers. All of this is created by workers, but it then comes back to alienate workers and to oppress workers. And that's a very, very problematic emotional state for people. That's a very, very problematic psychological state for people. So what we have, we've seen how these buildings are bringing capital together and they're bringing object together. And what this is part of a process of creating a global working class. That's what we are now standing in. When Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, which was published in Liverpool Street in 1848, the industrial working class covered bits of northern England, bits of northern France, bits of Belgium. The industrial working class today is about 20% of the world's population. That is an enormous number of people. And it is in factories in Swedish forests. It's in Foxconn. It's in the Pearl River Delta. One of the things that Marx talks about, this is all private property. All of it. We're standing on private property. This is private property that oppresses us. Marx says in the Communist Manifesto, this is against his bourgeois critics, in one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. When I was reading this on the train the other day, I actually burst out laughing. There's some wonderful stuff in the Communist Manifesto, and if you haven't read it, I really recommend. Now, we're going to end with two bits of writing. The first ending we're going to have is from the Communist Manifesto itself. And Marx and Engels end it with, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling class tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workers of the world, unite. We have a lot in common.
Who are you?
A member of KISS or a punk rocker.
Every year?
Just kind of funny. Yeah, I would dress up as a punk rocker. But when I was little...
So what'd you do when you became a punk rocker?
I wore a trash bag.
Night falls into dust and it's taken. while we could close the door and sleep all day. It's a September sky with pretty pictures in my mind that's lost its feeling. It's so great. Everything is beautiful here. It's spinning circles round my ear. I'm finally breaking free from fear, and it's fading out. Growing sleepy now as the rain falls, as children's rings and flowers form a chain. They sing a song with jelly jars and bird calls, as night falls into dust and day again. Everything is beautiful here. It's spinning circles around my ears. I'm finally breaking free from fear, and it's fading out, fading out, it's fading out, it's fading out.
See them tumbling down, pledging their love to the ground. Lonely but free I'll be found, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds. Cares of the past are behind. Nowhere to go but I'll find just where the trail will wind, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds. I know when night is gone that a new world's gonna dawn. I'll keep rolling along. Deep in my heart is a song. Here on the range I belong, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds. I know when night has gone that a new world's born at dawn. I'll keep rolling along. Deep in my heart is a song. Here on the range I belong, drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds.